Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to talk about one of those perennial questions that has been debated since the Civil War began. What were the soldiers of the North and South fighting for? Many have asked and answered it over the 160 plus years since the war started. Among them is the veteran pictured here, Sergeant Thomas Franklin Dornblaser of the 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry. He was a 19-year-old farmer and part-time school teacher when the war began in 1861. He was determined to enlist in the Union Army, but his father, Peter Dornblaser, a Stephen Douglas Democrat, had no interest in the idea of his only son going off to fight in a war. So young Thomas cleverly sought out his grandfather, John Dornblaser, who had fought the British and, in fact, recruited a company during the War of 1812. Grandpa John was sympathetic to his grandson's ideas of joining the army, and he persuaded his father to accept the son's enlistment. And so in the fall of 1861, young Thomas headed off to war, spending the next 4 years as a cavalryman with the 7th Pennsylvania. Most of that time was spent in Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama in various operations against enemy patrols of cavalry and other skirmishes and raids. He survived it all, was never wounded, and mustered out in September of 1865, months after the war ended. He went on to live a long life, over 100 years old. He died in late December of 1941, just a couple of weeks after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor precipitated direct American involvement in World War II. Now, in 1884, Thomas wrote a history of his regiment, the 7th Pennsylvania, with the title Saber Strokes of the Pennsylvania Dragoons. It's a great military title. In it, he talks about conversations he had with Confederate prisoners of war while in camp in Tennessee during the spring of 1863. His commentary, I'm going to share it with you now. It's candid and it's honest. Here's what he wrote. While in camp at this point, this is Tennessee, in the spring of 1863, the writer had considerable opportunity to converse with rebel prisoners and disloyal citizens. He also had access to Southern papers. He endeavored to find out, through every possible source, what the South was fighting for. Are you fighting for your Negroes? No. What then are you contending for? We are determined to set up an independent government. That was the universal answer. So that's how Thomas Dornblaser describes the Southern prisoners of war that he encountered. It's a very simple answer. No more, no less. They wanted to set up an independent government and said that it was not about slavery. Dornblaser continues, never in the history of the world, perhaps, was there such a fermentation and revolution of political sentiment as was now going on in the minds of the Union soldiers. Many of us were taught by eloquent stump orators that slavery, as it existed in the South, was not only humane, but also a divine institution. Proud of our democratic ancestry, which could be traced in the unbroken chain of descent back to Andrew Jackson and Thomas Jefferson, we felt exceedingly jealous of any apparent encroachment upon an institution so long recognized by our fathers as constitutional and scriptural. So there's a pause. There's Dornblaser, who is basically saying, hey, this is what we were taught. We were taught that slavery was divine and that there was no no conflict with the Constitution, all the way back to the days of Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson. The Constitution was a perfect document, and there's no way that it was being encroached upon by slavery. Dornblaser continues, and he touches on 1863. Flash forward to January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. Dornblaser says, or writes, accordingly, when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by the immortal Lincoln, we threatened to desert the army. We denounced that document as an infringement upon the rights of our Democratic friends in the South and as a misapplication of the results to be attained by the war. But, strange to say, as we neared Damascus, the scales fell from our eyes. We learned to our complete satisfaction that our Democratic brethren were not contending for slavery, but for the stars and bars, a slice torn from the old flag. This was disunion. This meant for destruction, and our Jacksonian blood forbade the wrenching of one star or one shred from the old flag of our fathers. Besides, our democratic eyes began to see the true inwardness of this abominable institution of human slavery. Like Moses in the brickyards of Egypt, we had an opportunity to see the whipping posts, the auction block, the menial cringing under his master's lash, and in that dusky face of our time-honored democracy, by and by, discovered a human soul, a brother man, and like the deliverer of Israel, we felt like striking down the man with the lash and lifting up the oppressed and setting the captive free. So there's Dornblaser in his candid writing. He's capturing a transition. All of the arguments against the Emancipation Proclamation before it was issued, all of the concern, all of the problems that it might create, and then it's issued. And eventually the scales fall from everyone's eyes, and they realize that, in fact, the war, it actually is about freedom. It is about ending slavery and getting freedom and equality for all. So thanks for listening to Sergeant Dornblaser's passage about slavery, freedom, and the question to, or I should say, his answer to that perennial question, what were the soldiers of the North and South fighting for? We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.